para alguien que entre por primera vez a psicología no debe tener una experiencia ni por si acaso similar a la mía, sino que obviamente la carga va a subir mucho en persona al colegio y hay que leer harto, mucho. Entonces si uno no está acostumbrado como a leer, yo me había acostumbrado a pasar noches y noches leyendo, entonces fue como un tránsito suave hacia eso. Pero sí puede ser un poco exigente en ese sentido para alguien que esté recién ingresando al mundo universitario. Eso. Y con respecto a lo social, a mí la católica me costó mucho más lo social porque la católica funciona con esto de secciones. Entonces hay, no sé, un ramo tiene 10 secciones. Y son secciones relativamente chicas, no sé, 50, 60 estudiantes, o hasta más chicos de repente. Entonces como que hay gente que veía en un puro ramo, que era de mi generación, y no somos tantos, somos como 100 y algo. Pero todavía me pasa que hay gente que no conozco, que no he visto, mucha gente en verdad. Si en medicina no cachaba como un tercio, en psicología no sé si no cacho, más de la mitad no los cacho. Pero tiene que ver con que me costó encontrar estos espacios como para ver a toda la generación completa. En medicina, en cambio, era algo como muy de, no sé, tenemos anatomía, tenemos todos anatomía en la misma sala gigante, pero veía la...
You know what's smart? Treating yourself.
Hace 4 días vinieron a la Casa Lau.
Каранты грабра, садные головы, сосветина, весь пух и прах, все с одного ребра и одна зака.
If you want to watch free brand.
Russian Revolution changed the world forever. Almost overnight, an entire society was destroyed and replaced with one of the most radical social experiments ever seen. Poverty, crime, privilege and class division were to be eliminated. A new era of socialism promised peace, prosperity, and equality for all the peoples of the world. But the social experiment failed. Millions were killed, and within a generation, almost 1/3 of the world's population was living in the shadow of communism. This story shows how an idealistic dream turned into a nightmare, as seen by the sailors at the vanguard of the revolution. Drawn from their letters and accounts, the story is told using archive and reconstructions of the events, all in color, just as they might have seen it. This is the story.
History Vault. Stream now over 2,000 of the best documentaries and series all about history.
This is like the eighth wonder of the world.
From ancient civilizations
They rose to the challenge, they rose to the occasion.
to American history.
The Civil War was
Of the Russian Revolution. Less than 20 miles from St. Petersburg, in the Gulf of Finland, lays a small fortified island. It was built to defend the former capital of Russia against attack from the sea. Surrounded by a string of fortresses, it is still an active naval base, and until a few years ago, the island and its garrison town of Kronstadt remained closed to visitors. Only recently has the story of what happened here in the early years of the revolution been finally pieced together. In February 1917, St. Petersburg was known as Petrograd.
Culiao.
Its third winter, and the long-suffering people
¿Cómo quiere que huele?
were hungry. Stocks of bread
No dobla.
to be rationed. The shortages meant many were queuing all night long, sometimes for just part of a loaf, and they were fed up with it. On the 23rd of February, women in the factories came out onto the streets to protest at the lack of bread. When rumors spread that the bread was being deliberately hoarded and held back from them, their mood darkened.
They threw some snowballs at the men's factories to get them out, and when the men came out on the street, it became clear that there was a very significant strike in the capital.
As the men from the factories joined the women, the cries changed from demands for bread to the removal of Russia's emperor, the Tsar. By the end of the afternoon, 100,000 workers were now on strike. Socialist agitators reacted to the demonstrations, and after factory meetings the next morning, workers again marched to the city, armed with spanners and hammers, ready for a fight. Among those watching the events unfold were some of the sailors on leave from the nearby.
No.
At first, we weren't sure what was happening. We talked about whether we should stay or go back to our base in Kronstadt. But to be honest, we didn't really care. Not at first. Raskolnikov was different. He wasn't on leave like the rest of us. He was training to be an officer, but he was also a real revolutionary, a Bolshevik. And as the demonstrations got bigger, he was really keen to find out what was happening. In the end, we all were.
Over the next 2 days, the protests grew louder, larger, and increasingly difficult to control. They could no longer be tolerated.
The response of the authorities was to sweep the demonstrators off the street, and they brought in soldiers to do that. And there was some considerable violence on the 25th of February.
Although many men, women, and children had already been hacked down or shot by the police, demonstrators still crowded the streets. One demonstration was brought to a standstill by a squadron of Cossacks who had been brought in to support the police.
I think the easiest way to grasp it is to think that Russia's been kind of a bottle of fizzy water that's been shaken and shaken and shaken for years. And suddenly in February the top comes off.
The Cossacks were one of the most brutal fighting units in Russia. They had shown no fear of ruthlessly crushing demonstrations in the past and were traditionally loyal to the Tsar. Now followed one of many moments over the next few days that would change the course of history.
Muy cerca, man. ¡Buah! ¡Ah, culiao! ¡Volar algo!
From this moment, the people called these men Comrade Cossacks, seeing them as merely workers and peasants in uniform. But one of the most fearsome units of the army had proved unreliable. The city authorities would now have to turn for help to Russia's very highest authority. They called on the Tsar.
Boh, me está jodiendo ya. Bueno.
The Tsar was the supreme ruler of the Russian Empire, but he was away at the front, overseeing his campaign in the war against Germany. But the war was going badly for Russia, and he had little time for what he saw as a protest or two back in Petrograd. He received telegrams pleading with him to take immediate steps about the situation in the capital. At first, he seemed annoyed by the interruption, but by the evening, he could resist the telegrams no longer. He responded in the only way he knew.
In terms of politics, he had absolutely no sense whatsoever. I think you could say that politically he was a complete idiot. He was getting advice from his police chief saying the situation's getting out of hand, we must take action. His instinct always was bring out the machine guns.
The confrontation with the people had escalated to a new level. The slogans on the banners now read, "Freedom or Death." By the fourth day of demonstrations, the center of Petrograd had become a battlefield, as fresh army units were brought face to face with the protesters. Now, under the direct orders of the Tsar, they were to shoot the demonstrators if they did not disperse.
Я приказываю! Сейчас же стреляйте! Я приказал стрелять! Открыть огонь! Ли! Ли!
People lay dead, but the Tsar had failed to end the protests.
Aumenta tus ingresos e impulsa tu crecimiento con Google Ads. Llega a clientes de gran valor en toda la red de Google. Búsqueda, shopping, YouTube y más. Empieza hoy.
Despite the killings, the demonstrations continued. Back at the barracks, The soldiers were becoming increasingly angry at what had happened, and when their officer tried to force them back onto the streets again, they made their feelings known. One soldier, Sergei Kapichnikov, said, "Our fathers, mothers, sisters, brothers and brides are begging for bread. Are we going to kill them?" The officer had lost control. Fearing for his life, he made the error of walking away. Then worse still, of running. A mutiny had started. Now they knew there was no turning back.
The crucial moment was the point at which they went into a situation of mutiny. And the only way they could preserve themselves or save themselves after that was by the mutiny spreading.
The soldiers moved from barracks to barracks, looking for support. And soon other mutineers were on the streets and joining with the workers. Whilst the streets of the capital were erupting in violence, over 30,000 soldiers and sailors were stationed nearby at Kronstadt. The sailors of Kronstadt were to become a key part of the revolution. These highly feared crack troops were literate and well-trained, as at that time, the Navy was at the forefront of technology. But Kronstadt was also a dangerous place. For many years, it had been a seat of deep frustration. Even the base commander, Admiral Viren, had likened the fortress to a gunpowder store.
It's a place where there's very strict discipline, where the sailors are kept under, these are new recruits, kept under a fairly tight control by the authorities before February 1917.
Sailors were treated little better than animals and could be severely punished for minor misdemeanors.
If you didn't salute, you could get 10 days detention. There was almost a suppressed war in Kronstadt between the officers and the sailors. Sailors in Kronstadt were just simply sitting in the ships. They'd hardly seen any action during the war. The ships were cauldrons of indiscipline. They were cauldrons of tension. It was just a bomb waiting to explode, essentially.
It was like a nuclear reactor of revolution, all a kind of critical mass of revolt, which sets off revolution at several points in Russia's history.
As the sailors heard more and more stories of what was going on in the capital, their frustration started to erupt again.
Officers, commanders tried to keep this information about Petrograd secret. But it's difficult to keep it secretly. It's close to the city, and sailors, they have also always contacts in staffs and so on. So they got portions of information, and they got rumors, of course, and sometimes rumors exaggerated the situation.
They knew there were riots in the streets. They knew that there was hunger and there were bread riots. But all of a sudden, it looks as though this is something much more than that. And they begin asking the authorities what's happening. They begin meeting. They begin holding illegal meetings of sailors around their ships. The authorities get nervous about what's going on. They begin to lose control.
Some of the sailors were veterans of failed rebellions in the past. They weren't going to make the same mistakes they had made then.
It's very difficult it's impossible to organize revolution. So one historical lessons for these guys at 1917 was A, not to drink, B, to control officers, and maybe it's better just to kill them.
On the 1st of March, the sailors gathered to elect a new revolutionary committee. This is the beginning of a bloody squaring of accounts. The sailors took little time to get their hands on the officers who had treated them harshly.
It all happened so quickly. In the space of one day, we rid ourselves of any officers that stood in the way. If they weren't with us, we killed them. At the top of our list was the man we hated the most. Admiral Viren came out of his house dressed in a white summer tunic. I think he wanted to look important, but he looked pathetic.
He was a very strict commander. They hated him. So they not thought them, I mean, rank and file sailors, to be one of us. He was one of them.
As they ripped off his epaulets, they read his sentence. Your barbarous, brutal regime has turned Kronstadt into a prison. Now take your reward.
Спаси Россию от этих уродов.
I was starved and thrashed by my own family every day, while they laughed at my suffering. So I planned my revenge.
By the following morning, the officers of Kronstadt have either been executed or killed by the sailors, or they've been imprisoned. Lucky ones have been imprisoned, and the old authority has been destroyed.
As the crisis deepens, the Emperor, Tsar Nicholas II, is stopped on his journey back from the German front. Revolutionaries have closed the line ahead, and he is trapped on the Imperial train. The dictatorial ruler now sits powerless in a siding.
The pathetic figure which Nicholas cuts in those last few days, where he can't even command his railway train to get back to Petrograd.
Now it was the turn of the Tsar to listen to others, and as each message arrived, it became clear that he had only one course of action.
Bombastic, this is fantastic.
To say, because like everybody else in the country. I mean, it's a very selfish move to decide, okay, I'm not going to do it, but everybody else will.
I think here they're talking about me not serving in the Turkish military, by the way, if I'm not mistaken.
As a place for mentality of ground, I feel like everybody feels an obligation to protect, to nurture this place that feels like the only place in the world where they can live and be Jewish and not be like discriminated.
I mean, when you're growing up with constant terror attacks, the army is a necessity. And I'm sorry if people think that's a controversial statement. That is the reality.
You're right. The army is a necessity. If you're a fucking occupying force, of course the army is a necessity. You're constantly terrorizing people that you're illegally occupying the lands of. Yeah, no other place on the planet except for the apartheid state of Israel where Jews can be totally safe. A place where the Israeli army is illegally occupying the lives of 2.5 million Palestinians in the West Bank in direct violation of international law, and also on the other side, another 2 million Palestinians in the beginning of Israel's genocide. Now those numbers have reduced, according to Trump's estimates, to like 1.7 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, dominating their lives, killing them every single fucking day. That's the only way that Jews can be safe in Israel. What a ridiculous crock of shit. I maintain the position that no country has simply a right to exist. But a country like Israel that is set up as an apartheid on the principles of ethno-religious supremacy with an exterminationist ideology on indigenous soil that they seek to eradicate and seek to destroy certainly does not fucking have a right to exist. That's ridiculous. This is not a controversial statement at all. Does Nazi Germany have a right to exist as a nation state doing the fucking Holocaust? No? Okay, then Israel doesn't either.
The person to decide I'm not going to do it is a very selfish decision, because meanwhile you're not doing it, everybody else is doing it and putting their life on hold. Very important years of your development, you're putting it on hold to go do this, and it helps nothing with your career afterwards. You finish it, then you start your actual life.
And I just want to note something before I analyse this clip here. Lying for Ethan and Hila is a very dangerous game, because you have published the vast majority of your life on the internet for well over a decade now. I mean, I've been watching you since I was 14, really. And what you said, first of all, was that, Hila didn't actually want to serve in the IOF, that, she was kind of forced to. But I think...
Maybe clarify by saying no country has a right to exist. That's what I said. I literally started off by saying that. That was the first statement I made. Like, the idea that, like, any country has a right to exist is a silly one to begin with. Like, people have a right to exist, okay? But it's so funny. You didn't hear me say exactly those words, verbatim, and said, hey man, you better clarify.
I think what's becoming clearer is that both of you are letting the mask slip. more and more, because in that original clip, you claimed, oh, it was mandatory and all of these things. But now Ethan is saying that it is a necessity, and Gila is saying that people who don't serve are shameful. That's not really congruent with the idea that you didn't want to serve, is it now? And Ethan and Gila are claiming here that the IOF is a necessity because of the really serious threats that Israel faces, terror every single day. But what are these threats? Where do they come from? Is there any context to them? Or are they just the result of the barbarous anti-Semitism that Jewish people face every single day in the Middle East? Well, of course they're not. And it's so ridiculous for Ethan to sit there and claim that he is pro-Palestine, because once again we can pick apart another part of his ideology. So Ethan says in the content loop that he thinks Israeli settlers in the West Bank are colonial settlers.
Netanyahu is a warfare. They're led by Netanyahu, who should resign in disgrace and go to prison for being a war criminal. Called the West Bank settlements an abomination. Settlers in the West Bank are religious zealots, they're monsters, they're genocidal. I've even said the West Bank settlers are valid military targets.
This doesn't also make sense, because, like, at the time when he said that, I didn't even realize that Gila had literally participated in a raid. What is the raid supposed to be? Why are people saying his lawyer? Like, what?
When you talk about, like, colonial settlers and stuff, like, that's actually happening in the West Bank right now. And these people are more or less valid military targets, in my opinion.
I mean, I'm not really sure that he knows what this means. But anyway, he thinks they're valid military targets. But he doesn't have a problem with his wife, who served in that area, who raided terrorist cities. He has no problem with that. He said just a few days ago that he is proud of what his wife did.
And, like, and I mean, to me, like, that's shameful and it's embarrassing. Hila served her country, she did her civic duty, and I think that's a good thing. That, you know, regardless, like, just in general.
But at the same time, he's against the occupation, he's against the extremities of Israeli society. What does he think Israeli soldiers do in the West Bank? They're not just having fun or protecting Israel, they are maintaining Israel's colonial regime in the West Bank. They are there so as to ensure that the Israeli occupation does not face any form of serious resistance. She was arresting people, most likely for opposing it. Who knows whether that was via armed resistance or peaceful means? I mean, Israel doesn't make a distinction. It doesn't even offer people trial before it begins its horrifying torture of them. I mean, Ethan Klein is a guy who claims that he thinks that there is a genocide going on in Gaza, yet simultaneously thinks that it is shameful not to serve in the Israeli military, that it is some kind of necessity. What?
Yeah, it doesn't... This is the problem. You have to look at, like, the overwhelming amount of his coverage on this issue to get a good grasp of, like, what he truly believes. Because there have been instances where he has said the things that he just added onto the fucking context cube. Ironically enough, the major inconsistency that is that's a great demonstration of this, a great demonstration of the other inconsistency we're talking about is the fact that he also brings up the $6,500 donation that he made to my fundraiser. Okay, that fundraiser where we raised, alongside this entire community, where we raised $1.6 million, I believe, in the immediate aftermath of October 7th. He uses that to say, look, I'm pro-Palestine. Look, I gave $6,500. Like, how could I be anti-Palestine? And then he chooses to deplatform the guy whose fundraiser he gave money to, and also has continued to say, oh, these guys raise funds, the Creators for Palestine charity that we also set up together. That charity is negligible. It's meaningless. It's so stupid. My $6,500, on the other hand, very, very important. Very important. It doesn't make any sense. Like, do you see the inconsistency there? On the one hand, he thinks it's fucking stupid to fundraise for Palestine. But on the other hand, he uses that as a form to say, look, I'm pro-Palestine, you see? This is inconsistent. How does no one see this in his audience? It's just like, on On basic principles. This is an inconsistent position to have.
I think that actually talking about Palestine and Israel on the internet is securing him. Every single time he opens his mouth, he puts his foot in it because he has no understanding. He has no coherent position. He just condemns the excesses of Israel without ever confronting what he actually supports. And I mean, he claims that Israel is under threat. He does it in the content nuke as well. He claims, oh, you know, Israel's under these threats. It has been since it was established. But where do these threats come from? I mean, Hezbollah, for example. What is the actual context of it? Well, Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982. Hezbollah largely came from that. It gained legitimacy through fighting against Israel, through driving them out in 2000, driving them out in 2006. It became popular. Lebanese people liked it because it stood up to Israel. And by the way, the crimes that Israel has committed against the Lebanese people are truly unbelievable. Since the ceasefire came into effect, who is the one terrorizing the people of Lebanon? Who is the one consistently carrying out bombardments during a ceasefire? It is absolutely obscene that this man sits here and tries to overplay the threats that Israel faces that come from its settler colonial nature. And the same goes for the terror attacks. Look, innocent civilians being killed is not a good thing. But Ethan claims that he opposes colonial settlers. He claims that he thinks there is a genocide. He says all of these things, but he lets his wife go on about how there are terror attacks every day. Does he not see that since the inception of the Zionist project in the early 20th century, Palestinians realized that they had to resist against what the Zionists were doing? They knew that the Zionists wanted to build a state that did not involve the Palestinians, where the Zionist project would be dominant over them. And so Palestinians have resisted ever since that date. And Ethan even seems to say that he thinks settlers in the West Bank are valid targets, but he doesn't carry that same energy for people who settle outside the Gaza Strip, who live on the lands of the people who were expelled to Gaza in 1948 during the Nakba. He doesn't.
Ironically, this is something that I try to get him to understand as well.
Doesn't care about that, you know, that doesn't matter. He's more interested in trying to talk about the Mizrahi Jewish people brought over to Israel after the expulsion of the Palestinians, rather than talking about the suffering of the Palestinians and actually contextualizing why they might resist.
What is this? Man really typing, supporting central authority while never making eye contact. Course typing, marks his face with a fingernail he can measure rice with. Standing to state but can't handle eye contact or finish wetting toilet seats. Guy in here just alt-tab to reread his own Discord messages for tone. You don't have to look over your shoulder. It must be great seeing yourself in the reflection of your screen when you're trying to disappear. Someone just adjusted their glasses and held their breath for 3 seconds. Love how some people in the chat write they're scared the professor's gonna grade their casual text messages. Man really out here typing with fingernails longer than his attention span. Imagine defending China while sounding like you're asking permission to speak every time. Who the fuck is this guy talking about? Is he talking about me? What the fuck? Are you alright, dude? Why are you reading all that? I don't know. He got fucking timed out. It's crazy. I think he just needs medical attention.
Condemns the tiny amount of Israelis with an actual conscience who don't serve and go to prison for a few months. People like Tal Mitnick, who I've actually spoken to, who I said over and over again, oh, it's a brave thing what you're doing. And he said, nah, laughing my ass off, it's the bare minimum. Because the truth
I've had Tal on this broadcast as well.
Is that how can you sit there and say, oh, I think there's a genocide going on, I think that Netanyahu's a war criminal, but not say actually it's wrong to help and aid and abet that? Hila served in the Israeli military on the back end of the Second Intifada, a period which is often portrayed as explosive Palestinian violence, where poor Israeli civilians were targeted for no reason. But it, of course, has context. It came after a major provocation by Ariel Sharon, and it...
Murad is watching me right now from right now. He's standing right next to me, away from the camera. And I said, what's up? What are you doing? And he went, Philip DeFranco is not live this week, so I'm forced to watch you instead. I need to beat his ass, dude. Worst brother of all time.
Also led to the murder of 4 times as many Palestinians. They also received horrifying collective punishment. The Jenin refugee camp was leveled. I mean, look at this photo. There were mass curfews, schools closed, people arrested, beaten, homes taken over by Israeli soldiers, and massive torture of Palestinians. How dare you sit there and make a distinction between your wife, who had no problem with serving in an army that did those things, and by the way, also took huge amounts of human shields. Here are articles about it. How dare you sit there and somehow try and make that acceptable? Something that you say you are proud of. You may say that your wife is just a secretary, but Israel's occupation of the West Bank, its torturous regime, its brutalization and murder of innocent Palestinians would not be possible without those desk secretaries who make the cogs go round. This man's politics are right-wing and disgusting, and he makes himself feel better about them by just deploying Orientalism, by portraying Israel and America as enlightened countries who don't engage in misogyny, slavery, bigotry against other people, who aren't irrational, who aren't hateful. But of course, he is unwilling to confront the fact that these are all charges which should be leveled against Israel and America, who have perpetrated them on far grander scales than any group he hates. Now let's move on to some clips of Ethan spreading some of the most despicable Zionist talking points that have been utilized to perpetrate Israel's horrifying crimes in the Gaza Strip.
When civilians fucking get murdered in Gaza, that's a dub for Hamas, because it raises it creates more pressure on Israel from the outside forces. You've got more people talking, more people outraged. So it's both. It is both. Israel is blowing up buildings and killing a ton of innocent people. But people who pretend that Hamas is anything but a fucking barbaric terrorist group that intentionally kills its own people for political gain is lying to themselves, dude. Holy shit. They literally put fucking command centers under hospitals. That's not even debated.
It is.
They were keeping some of the hostages in.
It's actually not debated, but not in the direction that Ethan thinks. Yes, it's not debated because Israel made this false claim, and then nobody really followed through on it when they showed zero evidence to suggest the matter. So the idea that Hamas puts command and control.
No, amigo, las naves espaciales, boludo, lo amé, amigo, lo amé a los kits. Para hacer los mejores 10 kills de mi temporada. Gracias aquí, boludo.
does not constitute the use of human shields. Indeed, Israel should carefully consider the implications of its repeated claims that it does, given that it maintains its military headquarters in a busy section of Tel Aviv. Ethan has spread one of the most deadly Zionist lies. It is truly despicable. For this man to try and sit there and claim that he is pro-Palestine is utterly obscene. And it's provable that the Israeli military just make up numbers when it comes to claims about terrorists or militants. You had this Haaretz article which stated that of 200 people who crossed an arbitrary line invented by Israel, which they executed, less than 10% of them had any link to Hamas. Or you have this article from the BBC about Israel's bombardment of Lebanon, where Israel made the claim, oh, we were bombing a Hezbollah command center, we were only targeting militants, we were eliminating Hezbollah commanders. But of the 73 people killed, only 68 of which could be verified, likely because they were torn to shreds and their families will never even get to bury them. Only 6 of them had links to Hezbollah's military wing. None of them held a senior rank. The other 62 of them were civilians, 23 children. And they were killed, and Israel lied, and people like Ethan believe it, and they show it to their audience of millions of people, tell them these kind of lies that are currently killing people in the Middle East. These are the claims which undergird Israel's genocide. This is the way that the consent is manufactured, which makes Israel's slaughter possible. This is why people are so anti-Israel, America, and the media in our countries. And as I have said over and over again, to the point where it is getting tired, for someone who claims to be pro-Palestine and anti-genocide to say these things is despicable, but it still shows you his Orientalism, this distinction in the way that the other fights. They are savages who lie, who want their own civilians killed, not like Israel. No, Israel's a moral nation. His wife was in their army, it's something that he's proud of. And I'd like to end with a very short segment about the recent anti-Hamas protests in Gaza that Ethan, like many other liberals who purport to be pro-Palestine but in reality are Zionists, has not been able to get over.
Ethan said you wouldn't have a career if you didn't have a podcast with him, Lamau. I think I'd probably have a better career right now if I never encountered Ethan Klein, if I'm being totally honest. A big part of his haters, and even like members, like a lot of content creators on the left, put me in the crosshairs for my association with him and started dunking on me way fucking harder. Like, it was definitely a reputational hit. You hadn't heard that, Lamau? No, I had not heard that. The reason why Ethan had me on as a co-host on his podcast was not because he was giving me a leg up. The fuck? I was averaging 30,000 viewers back then. The fuck is he talking about? If anything, it probably was reputational damage. He said you had under 10K viewers prior to October 7 and that the podcast revived you? Wait, what? Yeah, I think I don't know. Whatever. Yeah, sure.
This man has been so excited about them. He's found a new way to condemn Hassan, to say, oh, he's more pro-Hamas than me. Oh, I think that these are the only way to end Israel's genocide, and they're going to be brilliant. But what I would like to say is, look, no one who knows anything about Palestine should be surprised that there is anti-Hamas sentiment in Gaza. Life is very difficult in the Gaza Strip. During times like this, people turn against their government. And so I wouldn't actually have a problem with Ethan covering them if he hadn't used them as yet another way to excuse Israel's genocide, because Ethan has posted a plethora of stories about this, but I just want you to watch this very short clip where Ethan effectively says that
No, he specifically said that you do pro-Palestine content for the clout, not recognizing that your viewership took a hit because of it. Perhaps if that was the case, maybe he could use a little bit of that clout by doing actually pro-Palestine content then. Ironically enough, a third of my community left because of my insistence on covering Israel's atrocities every single day after October 7th, including the podcast that I had with Ethan that he did not want to continue doing because of our disagreements on Israel, and also the fact that he could not handle the backlash that he was receiving. Yeah. Also, I covered Palestinian emancipation extensively before our podcast. I covered it before October 7 as well.
These are the only means to end Israel's genocide.
The reason you don't see this, and I mean, Israel's forced them into a point of desperation where, like, they're willing to risk their lives, but, like, protesting against Hamas publicly is a grim...
You lost so many viewers after 10-7 for standing by your beliefs. He cannot imagine that. No, he can. Because he's losing viewers because he's standing by his beliefs. The problem is, his beliefs are fucking immoral. That's the difference. And also, inside of him, there is, like, still a conscience that is probably putting him at odds with his output, putting him at odds with what he's saying about Israel. He has to maintain this, like, moral superiority about being pro-Palestine. He has to lie to himself.
It's a grim outlook. That is not something you want to do. Hamas, just read their charter, listen to what they say. They're Islamic, they're violent.
They're Islamic?
And, you know, protesters, and it's known that protesters, people that there are who dissent against Hamas, get scooped up, get punished, disappear.
Now, if at this point you don't believe that Ethan is Orientalist and creates a distinction between them and us, he literally refers to one of the reasons for Hamas being so dangerous as them being Islamic. I think if I were to say that Israel is the way it is because it is Jewish, he would make videos about me calling me an anti-Semite. It is...
Oh yeah. 100p. 100p. As a matter of fact, he does that anyway. Like, he does that when people make the distinction between Zionism and Judaism, which is the truth, by the way, despite the endless efforts to conflate the two falsely. Ethan will turn around and say, all Jews are Zionists, and you're basically just substituting Jew for the term Zionist. So much so that his advocacy on the matter, paired up with the Anti-Defamation League, also known by its common name, the Apartheid Defense League, went and got the term Zionist barred. In Twitch TOS, they made Zionist a protected subcategory. It would be like Twitch saying, yeah, you can't say Nazi, it's a protected category. That was after Ethan's attempts of not only deplatforming me, but going after Twitch, the entire platform, claiming that this platform was the most anti-Semitic platform of all time, despite the fact that he was doing this on YouTube, where many of the content creators he claimed were, being anti-Semitic, alongside actual anti-Semitic content creators, still have a career on that platform that he's on.
Completely insane that he would say this, especially when you consider that Israel's violence against non-violent protesters is off the charts. During the First Intifada, a mass uprising that was largely non-violent, Israel deployed some of the most horrifying torture that you could possibly imagine. And you can read about how horrifying this torture was in texts such as On Gaza Beach. Yitzhak Rabin, someone who is considered one of the most peace-loving Israeli prime ministers, issued an order to break the bones of non-violent protesters, and this isn't something that went away.
Bro is still obsessing over Ethan, not like he makes a comedy podcast. I don't know, I don't think it's really funny to do genocide defense over and over again. Also, it's really hilarious to say I'm the one obsessing over Ethan when every single time I even briefly cover the subject matter, let alone an entire video from a separate content creator dissecting some of the insane things that he's done, chatters come to me with 100 different instances where he has said something absolutely insane over the course of the past couple of weeks that I didn't even fucking know about. I also said he is supposed to be a comedian, and he said he wasn't one, so I don't know which one it is. Rent-free? Okay, chatter. Yeah, rent-free. You're right. So rent-free that the person that I'm rent-free in the mind of is saying he wants to sue me and apparently talk to a fucking civil litigator the other day about possibly getting me charged with promoting domestic terrorism. How many Instagram stories have I made about Ethan Klein? How many Instagram stories he's made about me? How many episodes has he talked about me? How many episodes has he dedicated entirely to me or my friends? It's pretty funny that I don't have to actually say anything. He just constantly gets in trouble on his own because everyone can see that he is behaving in this hysterical manner.
Israel's response to the Great March of Return, a march that initially was not supported by Hamas, although later they didn't come out against it, but was largely non-violent. Israel responded by shooting Palestinians. Look at this one, where an Israeli sniper brags about maiming 42 Palestinians in one day. These were horrifying, traumatic injuries that led to people losing their legs and being unable to walk. But Ethan would never dare to say that Israel is an innately violent country, that it is this way because it is Jewish. No, because that's not acceptable. But when
you think you're sincere of saying the N-word, then stories about the backlash by talking about you? What? What?
When it comes to Muslims and people from the Middle East, he sees them as different. He sees the way they behave.
You said you watched that clip yesterday, Lamau?
As unacceptable because of where they come from and because of the fact that they challenge the dominance of the West and Israel.
I mean, listen, I feel like this is a force that's going to help end the war, not fucking keeping hostages and underground and like sending, just continuing to provoke Israel to attack them.
And the core problem with this is that the Israeli government doesn't care about the hostages. The Israeli government doesn't care about Hamas. Just a few days ago, Benjamin Netanyahu stated that voluntary migration was the plan, that they would control the Gaza Strip, that's it. They're not hiding it. It's a plan. Anyone can discuss it with them. They are openly planning to ethnically cleanse 2 million people. Why are you obsessing over these protests? They are not going to save the Palestinians. They are not going to end the suffering. The genocide that you allegedly condemn, the thing that you have spread the propaganda that has enabled, Israel is just ramping up the destruction. It's why they blew up the Turkish cancer hospital, the only cancer hospital in the Gaza Strip.